Hello everyone. This lesson is brought to you by the math teachers of Dwana Ranch High School, the Geometry PLC. This is topic 4 for our first unit, the review of algebra topics, solving quadratics by square rooting. This is part 1. There will be another part for this topic with the solving systems of equations. So in this topic, we're solving quadratics by square rooting. So to get us started there, we have what number or numbers times itself is equal to 36. So first thing most of you come up with, you're thinking about that and you realize that 6 times 6 equals 36. What some of you thought of that many others didn't think of right away is that you could also multiply negative 6 times negative 6 to equal our positive 36. So that's kind of the key to solving by square rooting, because when we take the square root of one of those perfect squares, we don't know, was it the positive 6 times 6 or the negative 6 times negative 6 that equaled that positive 36. So we have to account for both of those situations. All right, our steps for solving quadratics by square rooting. Mine will look a little bit different than what yours does in your note packet, because I just copied and pasted some steps to save myself some writing. So we have step 1. We want to isolate the variable or variable expression that's being squared. So example in there in the parentheses could look like some variable plus or minus a number of some sort being squared. So that would be that variable expression. And then we're going to use our inverse operations to do that. In step 2, we will take the square root of both of those values that we have left, or if you want to think of it just simply as we're taking the square root of both sides of the equation. Don't forget the plus or minus. Okay, that's what I was talking about up above. So we don't know, was it the positive 6 times 6 or the negative 6 times negative 6, so we have to account for both. So we put a plus or minus sign in front of whatever that is after we take the square root. We're going to simplify radical answers if we have any. And then our special note here, when a variable squared or the expression squared is isolated, it cannot equal a negative number. If it does, there will be no solution. So let's go through some examples together. In these examples, I want you guys to remember that if I'm going too fast for you or you have a distraction of some sort, it's not like in class where if you get into a little bit of a daze and you zone out for a little bit and then you come back and all of a sudden we've gone through 2 pages that you missed. You can stop and rewind this lesson, so please, please, please take advantage of that. If you need to see something more than once, rewind it. If I'm going too fast, you can slow down the playback speed, but that'll probably sound even weirder than it already does. But it's something you could try. So please take advantage of these being videos and being able to watch things more than once. So our first example, we have, first of all, I guess the directions. So we want to solve each equation for the variable. If needed, we're going to write our answer in simplified radical form. I don't believe that comes up in any of these, but just know that it is something that you might see in other problems. So number 1, we have x squared minus 2 equals 14. So we want to isolate whatever's being squared. In this case, just x here is being squared. So we want to isolate that. So to do that, we are going to add 2 to both sides. We have x squared equals 16. So again, we're trying to isolate that x. We got the part being squared by itself. So now we'll take the square root of both sides of our equation, or both values. So we take the square root of both sides, and most of you, again, right away you realize square root of 16 is 4, but the part that many of you, again, try to forget is that it could be the negative 4 as well. That's where that plus or minus comes in. So we just said simply that it's x equals plus or minus 4, or positive or negative, however you prefer to say that. Don't forget, you can always check your work. So if you plugged in those 2 values to the original equation, you can double check and make sure that works. So just quickly, verbally checking this. If we square one of our solutions, let's pick the positive. 4 squared, 16 minus 2, yep, that's 14. And if we try the negative, a negative times a negative is a positive, so negative 4 times negative 4, positive 16, minus 2, 14. So they both work. Those are the correct solutions. All right, on to number 2. Negative 5 minus 4x squared equals negative 45. So we're trying to isolate, again, the part that's being squared. So we're really, first step, trying to get that by itself, and then we'll isolate the x by taking the square root eventually. So first step, remember when you're solving equations, it's essentially backwards order of operations. So we want to add or subtract first. So we will add our 5 to both sides. We have negative 4x squared equals negative 45 plus 5, and that would be negative 40. Then we'll divide both sides by whatever's in front of our x squared there, in this case, negative 4. Those will cancel. Again, not just because I feel like crossing it out. The reason why we're canceling out in this case is we have a negative divided by negative is a positive. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So it's just 1x squared. And we don't have to show that coefficient 1. And that equals negative 40 divided by negative 4. Negative divided by negative is a positive 10. Next step, now that we have that isolated, we'll take the square root of both sides. Square root of x squared is our x. And again, we have to remember, was it a positive, was it a negative? We account for both. Positive, negative, square root of 10. Those are our two solutions, positive square root of 10, negative square root of 10. Really quickly, we mentioned above that sometimes you have to simplify some of the radicals. I didn't even attempt to because I know it doesn't simplify, but if you need to check one that might, just do a factor tree. In this case, what can I multiply to get 10, 2, and 5? They're both prime numbers, so I know it won't simplify any further than just the square root of 10 was to start with. Alright, moving on. Just another reminder, again, if I'm going too fast, it's not in class, we can rewind easily, so take the time to rewind if you need it, or pause for a second and let yourself kind of take things in and continue. Number 3, we have x squared plus 24 squared equals 25 squared. So very similar to the top one, except we have these two numbers being squared. So first thing I will do is go ahead and simplify those numbers, multiply them out. What is 24 squared? 24 times 24. Majority of you probably don't have that memorized. I didn't either. That is 576. Equals 25 squared. Few more of you will have that one memorized. That's definitely one that most math people know from enough practice. 25 times 25, 625. And now we're down to pretty basic steps like the problem above. So we would subtract our 576, so we can isolate that part being squared, isolate the x. So we're subtracting that 576, we get x squared equals 625 minus 576. That will equal 49. And now we're down to our x squared being by itself, so we need to isolate that. We did. And now we take the square root. The square root of both sides gives us our x. Square root of 49 we know is 7. And then don't forget, it could be a positive, it could be a negative. We account for both solutions, so it's positive or negative, or plus or minus 7. And haven't mentioned it in a while. Take the time, you can always check your work. It goes pretty quick. Number 4, in this case, x squared plus 11 equals 7. So we want to solve this for x like the other ones, solve by taking square roots. So we isolate our x squared, we subtract 11 from both sides. X squared equals 7 minus 11, and negative 4. At this point, hopefully you read what was up above, and then hopefully you recognize these when you're doing your work, because if you don't, you'll end up making some mistakes. So we have our x squared by itself, and it equals a negative. So you can't multiply something by itself and equal a negative, so that's where we know this is going to be a no solution problem. And so why is it a no solution again? We have our x squared, or in other problems something else, maybe squared, equals a negative number, and again that cannot happen, it's a no solution. So why I want you to be careful is if you continued working and did the square root of both sides, if you're not paying attention to that negative, you might say you get 2 and negative 2. And then another reason to check your work, if you were to plug that back into that original equation up here, we'd have 2 squared, 4, plus 11, 15. That doesn't equal 7, so we know we have a mistake there. So again, because we ended up with this x squared equals a negative, and that cannot be, that is where we get our no solution. So it's a little bit different than some other problems. Alright, sorry for the phone call in the middle of that. It was about time for a break anyway. So, tried to show you the answers ahead of time. Take a minute and pause the video, which I forgot to say first before I started moving the screen. Go ahead and try these bottom 4 problems, numbers 5 through 8. Try those on your own, and then I will talk about those with you in just a minute. So pause the video, go through 5 through 8 on your own. Okay, hopefully you took the time to actually try those on your own. I am going to put up my work to these, and then just briefly talk about a couple of things there. Remember, if you have questions on these, you can email or reach out through Teams to your teachers. If you have a question about a specific problem, I suggest Teams, because then the whole class is going to get to see that, and they can take a chance to go through that and see what's there. If you have a question on something, there might be 8 or 10, a dozen other people that have the same question. So please take the time to put it into Teams is my suggestion for my students. So number 5, just really quickly going through a couple things. First step, if we divided by -8, we end up with a negative again, and something squared can't equal a negative. That's why that was a no solution. The rest of those are there. If you have specific questions, please reach out to your teacher. This is part 1 of this topic, and there will be a second video for part 2. Let us know if you have questions. Thank you.